Have you ever had it happen to where you're studying things and they become clearer, they become more transparent to you? Well, I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I'm more convinced than ever of what they mean. We're going to talk about the Second Amendment, and also we're going to talk about what I call the sword of Peter. Since they're sort of sword related and the right to keep and bear arms, they're a little bit related. I'm going to talk about it because they're misunderstanding in both ways. Now, of course, Peter, let me just mention one thing. Jesus says in one verse, he says, after Peter cuts the high priest servant's ear off, he says, "Put your sword into its sheath, for all who take the sword shall perish with or by the sword," depending on your translation. So that has been taken to believe that so you can never use a weapon for any purpose or you'll die by that weapon, which that on the face doesn't make sense, but we'll get back to that. Now, Second Amendment, sort of based in three parts, you might say. You have the first part about the militia, second part about the security of a free state, and then the final part, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. See, that really is predicated upon the security of a free state. See, they could have simply said, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, that's all. But it had more power for us today that they said what they did. A well-regulated militia, it says, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well-regulated, I think people may get on top of themselves with that. It had nothing to do with being a standing army. It's not the National Guard, because both of those, the government owns the weapons. So we know we own the weapons in a Second Amendment militia. But a militia is simply a mechanism if needed. It's a mechanism. And well regulated, I personally don't see how any militia would have any chance of succeeding unless it's tied to some kind of military force. So we would be a enhancement, you might say. I mean, your local, your state, some kind of organization would have to be there. Otherwise, it'd be a bunch of men running around the woods with guns. And I think basically that was what they were saying, that to be well regulated, it had to be associated with something that would be effective. Now, of course, if the government has turned against you, and frankly, if your state government too has turned against you, you'll be a bunch of men running around the woods with guns. You have no way to organize yourself. So I think well regulated ties it to an effectiveness, which would mean you would join up and offer much more manpower to the armed forces in case something happens. But it's not a standing army. You don't meet once a month. You're not paid. You're not on a list. It's just when you're needed against enemies, foreign or domestic, you would be available because you own your own weapon. But it's all predicated upon the security of a free state. So because that is so important from enemies, foreign or domestic, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, because you have to have your own weapon. They can't be government owned. And then again, the mechanism is the militia. When the need would arise, you would join with others to stand against the common enemy. That's pretty plain and simple. But we need the best weapons. Because broadly put, the Second Amendment is about the people's ability to wage war for the security of a free state. And how they would do that is called a militia. Now, I'm talking about Jesus for a moment, and the sword of Peter, as I refer to it. Now, that is covered in four Gospels. All four Gospels. We don't get every exact event or every exact word in all four Gospels, but we get a picture here. And John is the only other one where it mentions the sword. In fact, it's the only one that mentions Peter by name. And there it only records that Jesus said, "Put your sword into its sheath." Then after he said, "Shall I not drink the cup the Lord's given me?" And that's important to remember those words. That's all he said. That's all it's recorded that he said. Now, one of the Gospels, he doesn't address the apostles or the disciples at all. He just addresses the crowd. And in one of the Gospels, he said, "Let this happen. They come to arrest me, let it happen." But look at Matthew. Matthew is the most detailed one set. Well, before we go to Matthew, in one of the Gospels, it says, when they which were around Jesus saw what was going to happen, when the crowd come from the high priest with swords and staves, they come to arrest Jesus. When the ones around Jesus saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, shall we strike?" And it says, Scripture says one did strike with the sword, and that was Peter, but he's not named. Now we know the apostles, when they were with Jesus right before they came there, they had two swords. Jesus said, when I sent you out without anything, did you lack? And they said, no. He says, now I want you to buy a sword. He said, for it's going to happen to me, as it's recorded, that be numbered among the transgressors. Now some people, the reason I may bring this up, some people want to twist that and say that Jesus wanted them to buy swords or have swords for the express purpose of when they got to the garden and cutting the high priest's servant's ear off, they would then become transgressors, and Jesus would be numbered with them, or the outlaws. Now, I don't think Jesus would set his own disciples, his apostles up, by telling them to buy swords for the express purpose, I want you to become an outlaw, so then I will be numbered with you. That doesn't sound like the Lord. So let's just dismiss that. So he said, buy a sword. I think, frankly, he's telling them, buy a sword because I'm leaving. I'm going to be hung on the cross. It's going to happen to me. As the Scripture says, I'll be numbered among the transgressors. And Mark confirmed that when he hung on the cross between the thieves, he was numbered with the transgressors. Okay, let's put that aside. So in the garden, here's what's going on. They come to arrest Jesus. There's other people there besides the disciples. Besides the apostles, there were other disciples there. They see what's going on and say, Lord, shall we strike? Peter does strike. Jesus looks at Peter and said, put your sword to its sheath. And I don't know if anyone else drew a sword. Then now he's speaking to all of them. For all who take the sword shall perish with the sword. What does that mean? Anytime you go up against the government, which that's what that was. The high priest was the civil authority. Even though they were under Roman occupation, high priest had authority to arrest and do such things. He's saying, now they've come to arrest me, which is what I want to happen in the first place. Because right after Jesus finishes speaking to Peter, well, after he says, put your sword into its sheath, or all who take the sword shall perish with the sword, he says, don't you know I can call 10,000 angels? Don't you know? And again, in other scripture we see, he says, shall I not drink this cup? And then in one of the Gospels, he said, let this happen. He's talking to them. Let this happen. So we've got disciples there ready to fight. We don't know how many swords were amongst all of them. They're ready to fight. He said, put your swords up. He said, this has got to happen. This is why I came. I could deliver myself if I need to. And if you fight now, you'll die now. You've probably seen that even in movies, that same scenario where someone's got a gun and they say, put it up or they'll kill you. The police will kill you if you don't put it up. That's all Jesus was saying. If you read it all and put it all together, he's not establishing some passivity kind of doctrine right here, where everybody now is pacifist. He's just not. He's just not. And of course, the Christians weren't out fighting against the government because that's anti-scripture itself. God has already said He's ordained government to fight against evildoers. But there's always something. There's always self-protection when we talk about the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment is there. Your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Of course, it's about the people's ability to wage war. But since you have the gun, you can defend yourself. But again, it was written for the express purpose of the security of a free state from foreign or domestic enemies. That's just, and don't say, this is 2018. We don't need that. Now, what about 2048? You can never predict the future. You can never predict the future. Now, I believe in the second coming of the Lord, and it may be very soon. And, every who's left here is left here. But, and I feel sorry for you if you're one of those. But having said that, just the subject we're talking about, the Second Amendment and the sword of Peter. Peter had the sword the whole time. He had it, of course he had it in a sheath. He had this thing. Jesus never had a problem with it. There never was a question. In fact, you remember, if you want to talk about Jesus, some people think Jesus is just I don't know how you want to describe it, but you remember when he took a whip, went into the temple and drove them out and threw over their tables? Remember that? He did that. That's recorded in all four Gospels also. Now, he didn't kill anybody. He didn't take a sword. It wasn't appropriate, But to defend ourselves, defend our families, my goodness. Like for some reason, we can't be men. You get saved, you know the Lord, but you can't be a man. You shouldn't seek to hurt anybody, but you also should protect your family. Now, I think we've unpacked that by as much as we can. Now think upon these things.